Rcast. Welcome to the Climate and Coordination Rcast, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Well, welcome everybody to a new week of the Climate and Coordination Rcast. Today I have a few different topics. I'm not exactly sure if it's the if it's the happiest stories, but it's kind of two big news stories that I really wanted to talk about. And over the last week, I've been really thinking about the societal sort of consciousness around the climate crisis. And I guess I have a central question, which maybe we could explore today, but also it could go into a different direction. I'm just curious if we as a society have become already too well adjusted to these climate disasters that we don't even possibly care when they happen, for years, well, decades, but definitely for years. We've been talking about, as a society, some pretty catastrophic climate events happening, and I guess here's one example. This is, I'm not sure if this really made the major headlines because we have a lot going on around the world today with COVID and a lot of other stuff, but here's the first story I wanted to mention. This is from CNN, but obviously this is being reported all over the world. This is about the collapse of a Canadian ice shelf larger than the size of Manhattan, which has collapsed into the ocean as of last week, August 8th. And I really liked what they did here because there's a little sliding picture, so you can see the difference between July 30th and August 4th, because it took a kind of few days for the whole thing to collapse. And anyway, this ice shelf, it says, was reduced by 43% over these 2 days. But you can see the full collapse until August 4th. So I guess it takes a few days to see the entire thing, but it really collapsed over July 30th and 31st. And then I guess it probably took a few more days for scientists to realize that it collapsed. Anyway, it says here, this large sheet of ice then drifted into the Arctic Sea, further breaking into two large chunks. This entire calving event, the scientific term for the breaking of ice chunks off of glaciers, which is called calving, was captured by the Copernicus Sentinel satellite. So this, it says here, this piece that broke off was around 80 square kilometers, larger than the 60 square kilometer Manhattan, which is so funny because I used to live there, and it's so funny to realize how small it really is. I mean, obviously an ice shelf larger than Manhattan is definitely an emergency event. It's just, anyway, really surprising when you live in New York that it's actually not that big of a place. But this ice shelf did collapse. It's a huge ice shelf. It's a cataclysmic event. And I'm not even sure that it was really very widely publicized. And this is the first of two sort of climate headlines of the past week that I just wanted to see, like, if anybody has any thoughts on whether people are kind of too well adjusted to these things, that now instead of seeing these as like major warning signs, people are kind of saying, well, we knew it was going to happen, so who really cares? So anyway, I just thought this article was a really high quality piece. I really like the sources that they use. And I think this really explains why the ice shelves are collapsing, if people are interested in reading about that. And also that little picture that you can slide between before and after it collapsed, so you can actually see the satellite image. I think that's really interesting too, because a lot of people have not seen those kinds of images before. So I'm not sure if anybody has any comments on this one, but there is one more. And I guess the secondary question would be, how can we make sure that society actually responds to these events rather than just seeing them as inevitable? I don't know. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
yes.
Go ahead, Daryl, after you.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think you're right. Like I see it happen to myself. I have a news feed app where I have different categories, and I have the climate change category and crypto category, and I flip around, but sometimes I'm like, I don't want to open that climate change category right now. I'll just read what crazy things Trump said today instead, because like I find that it's just sometimes it's kind of too depressing or too challenging for my brain to handle, and I kind of want some more kind of easy news to kind of close off my evening with. So I think a lot of people are like that. I think that we're just perhaps it's part of how news functions in our society, where we just kind of want the kind of easy to digest stuff. And I think really our society as well, we're not really conditioned. Our empathic powers are not honed, shall we say, in our society to the degree where we see some other part of the world being affected, and we are kind of getting used to seeing it. It just becomes like, we see these torrential floods dragging cars down the middle of a road now, and we're just like, oh yeah, another flood. And one article that I think I saw this week that might like conjure up heart attacks among people from Britain is that the cod supply could disappear from climate change, and fish and chips will no longer be available in England. To me, that headline would probably create more of a reaction than giant ice shelves falling from the Arctic.
That could very well be, and I hope they're reporting that as well.
Well, I wanted to look at it from the perspective of another scale, which is, I think very frequently cataclysmic events happen in our own bodies. And oftentimes we don't know. And a lot of times with many lifestyle choices, not only do we know, but we just kind of let it slide, right? How many people do we know that smoke cigarettes, for example, or have other kinds of health issues that they can't be awake to. It's just it's a part of the way human consciousness and human attention is organized.
Yeah.
Right, and so this is a part of the struggle.
Right.
But I think the nice thing is that it is possible to wake up.
Yeah. Absolutely. I just had one more example from this past week, and I'm not trying to make everybody really depressed, but I honestly don't know if anybody is talking about this right now. There was a huge storm in the area of Seville, Spain, Sevilla. This is a blog piece from El País. And there is, speaking of floods carrying cars down the street, Daryl, you predicted it. There's an amazing video here that somebody captured. This is from August 12th, 2 days ago. Spain. My family lives in Spain. This is really not supposed to happen, where you have these insane torrential floods that are, destroying a town. And I was reading this blog piece, and if you want to watch the video of the flood, I think people should watch the video of the flood. I reposted it on Twitter because it just seems like, why is it that people don't, even realize or care that these things are happening? I know I've said this before, but I've read this blog. It's a very short blog. There's a video of the storm. And there's no mention of the climate crisis at all. It just says heavy rainfall and hailstorm. A hailstorm caused flash flooding in a number of municipalities in Seville on Tuesday. And it just goes on to talk about the force of the water carrying away cars parked on the streets and caused the collapse of at least one house. And I just, they call it a weather event. They mention the emergency services. This really is like reminding me of the flooding that was in Orange County recently. And I read in several pieces, because I like to read how things are reported, no mention of the climate crisis, no mention of sea level rise, no mention of worsening storms, no mentioning of anything really. And you can go to Miami and it'll flood there, and they won't mention the seawall or the rising temperatures or the, any of it. They just say, whoops, bad day on Earth. Let's go back to normal. But I just, and the funniest thing about this little blog is that at the end, there aren't really very many words, but there's a few paragraphs. At the end, it says, a similar meteorological phenomenon was seen last year when a hailstorm caused damage in a number of areas in Andalusia toward the end of August. So at the end, they're just saying, oh, and by the way, this insane extreme weather event, which is life-threatening and completely unprecedented, also happened last year, which is should be more cause for alarm. That, and I guess some people might say, well, if it happened last year, then it's probably not that bad. But, or you could say, well, if these once in 1,000 or 2,000 or whatever year floods are happening every year now, then maybe we have a problem, and I guess people don't want to ring the bell that often because maybe they feel like they're going to be crying wolf or something. Maybe that's what the problem is. I'm confused. I'm sorry. I'm so perplexed. And I also just wanted anybody who listens to our Rcast to know about this storm, because I just don't know if anybody even realizes it's happening. So that's my question. I would like to know how we can stop becoming so well adjusted to the end of our planet that we don't even take the action to save it. That's my premise, I suppose. Easy question. Softball.
Yeah, I guess, Greg makes a really good point. It's kind of part of our human nature with our own bodies to kind of ignore glaringly bad things that are happening to us. So it's one of the things that has to shift, I think, is we need to literally change ourselves. Not an easy task.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of it is becoming sensitive. And my own experience with whenever my sensitivity has increased is it doesn't always feel good. It's like you have this heightened level of sensitivity, and there's just a lot more pain that you're registering. There's a lot more suffering. Of course, there's also a lot more joy, and a lot of other things come in because, when you're sensitive to many things. I remember I was once in an outdoor session, so it was a fairly large group with the Tai Chi master. And you think of these Tai Chi masters or masters of other disciplines as perfectly calm and perfectly like serene, but in fact it's not the case. With this particular person, she had this obviously heightened sensitivity, and she could register every little imbalance the postures and attitudes, physical attitudes of the people in the class. And I could watch as her attention would shift around the group. and she would just suddenly be at somebody's side saying, well, what if you were to try this? Or and her disease, she had learned how to take that heightened sensitivity and unrest and lack of ease and turn it into effective healing, effective countermeasures. So that, because essentially what would happen is the attitudes of ill-formed posture would register in her own body. And so she would find herself compelled, because of the experience inside her body, to go to where this lack of balance was, and take effective action to bring it more into balance, more into harmony. And so what I've suggested on these calls over and over again is these kinds of technologies are the sorts of technologies that we have to begin to employ on a wider and wider scale, so that, for example, the discomfort that you're feeling, Nora, is really a part of that process of, taking the discomfort which comes from a heightened sensitivity and turning it into effective action so that we can bring things back into balance. Again, that's just my experience and my way of interpreting my experience. But does that make sense?
Yeah. It's at the risk of sounding sexist against men, I think that that women may be more genetically hardwired to be able to achieve these kinds of sensitivities easier than men.
Well, I don't think anybody can, disagree. There's science that points to the differences in male and female brains, and the female brain definitely, in general, has, I think, a wider sense of compassion because women give birth, for one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that definitely makes somebody more sensitive. Like a lot of women, for example, not all women, but a lot of women, feel like a stronger compassion towards other people because it's somebody else's child, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, I was really just talking about how, the first step is heightened sensitivity.
Right,
But
exactly.
but then another step after that is, what do you do with that sensitivity? Because there are lots and lots of people, introverts, if you want to bring in brain science, introverts as an example. There are lots and lots of people who, in the face of that heightened sensitivity, shut themselves off. Right? They turn off.
Well,
the
right,
news.
because it's too painful.
Because it's too painful, right? So
Right.
The next step is, like once you've got the extra source of information, which is very frequently an irritant, what do you do with that? How do you turn that into that seeming disadvantage into an advantage? Right?
Yeah.
And that was
being a feeling person, like in today's day and age, is very exhausting, obviously.
Yeah, so that's it. And that was sort of what I was saying, that what made this Tai Chi master a master was, it wasn't that they weren't experiencing, that they were in the state of serenity. Quite the opposite. It was obvious that she was registering the lack of balance in the group in her own body. It was as plain as the nose on your face. But she didn't come across as an anxious or nervous or irritated person. She found a way to respond to it quickly. Like suddenly she would be at someone's side. What if you tried this? Have you considered this possibility?
That's amazing. Like, to be able to stay calm and serene during that heightened sensitivity. That's like pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think that this is what's being asked of us is to step up our game. right? We sort of have to become Tai Chi masters overnight, if we're gonna make it through this period where we literally respond to the consequences of how we have behaved on planet Earth.
Yeah.
It's kind of conjuring up thoughts in that, that book, Robert A. Heinlein, Stranger in a Strange Land?
Oh, yes.
The kind of concept of grokking. It's like we need to develop that ability.
Yes. And what was your what was your other article, Nora?
Oh, that's all I have today, but I know that Daryl might have some more things to discuss. And
I have one good news piece.
oh, right. Yes. Great.
And this is kind of back into the kind of file under category that climate change is good business. So the headline is, does BP's conversion signal the end of big oil? August 10th. I'll just read a bit.
What's the publication?
Oh, it's CNN.
Uh-huh.
In business. The plunge in oil demand caused by the pandemic won't fix the climate crisis, but it could force the oil industry to accelerate a shift away from fossil fuels as executives try to carve out a future in clean energy. UBS analysts estimate that earnings in the sector were down 172% on average last quarter compared to the same period a year ago. That puts pressure on producers to make big strategy moves that companies have long resisted. BP, and their slogan has been Beyond Petroleum for quite a while now. So BP said last week that it would slash oil and gas production and pour billions of dollars into clean energy, speeding up a transition it teased earlier this year. The company said it now expects demand for fossil fuels to fall by 75% over the next 30 years if the increase in global temperatures is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius, or by 50% if warming is less than 2 degrees. And so here's a quote: energy markets have begun a process of fundamental lasting change, shifting increasingly towards low carbon and renewables, BP Chairman Helge Lund told analysts. Over the longer term, the demand for both oil and gas will be increasingly challenged. So I think, when you're seeing like the biggest oil companies in the world, not just indicating, but actually executing on a massive shifts in their business model away from the thing that made them money.
But they're also still doing the things that right? They're still producing a huge amount of oil, right? And they're still slowing down the process. It's not like I think it's great that they realize that there's a shift happening, but I think we have to be careful about not overly trusting them, because they are masters of PR, and they did all cover up the science of climate crisis, for 30, 40, possibly 50 years,
Right. So that's why this is exciting to see the shift happen.
No, it is exciting, but I just think also we have to be careful because they have a great ability to lie. So I think just making sure that they stay accountable to the things that they say is really, really important.
Well, they're just following the money. That's the point that I'm trying to make.
Right. But like they enrich themselves, by prolonging this too. Like they can still, yeah. It's a tricky time because I think a lot of oil companies are trying to get like that last bit that they can get, you know what I mean? And there are, there's new coal projects happening all over the world. There's, people in America are still trying to, do more pipelines, even though, obviously there's a huge demand and necessity for a different way. But I do wonder if it's possible for these companies to make more money the more they prolong themselves changing.
Well, the CEOs aren't thinking your strategy is right. They're following the money. This is my point.
Well, that's what they say, right? But like what they do would be a
No,
very
no,
different.
it's what they're doing. It's what they're doing. Now, I'm not saying they're like, perfectly trustworthy and that, of course they're having to shift away from something. So they're
Uh-huh.
going to continue to prolong things in certain areas, but in other areas, they're going to be focusing on where the money is, which is not oil any longer. That's just my point, right?
Yeah,
No, I mean,
I
that's
think,
absolutely true. There's no question about that.
yeah, and then I think both of you are right in the sense that uh, even as they make a shift, it's not necessarily this long ingrown habits to practice business in a way that um, is not necessarily good for the planet. So they are not necessarily looking for long-term solutions, right? Whereas at this point, we have enough experience to know that many things have to shift together, right? And
Yeah.
this is why I keep talking about a shift in governance model, right? There um, a UK colleague of mine was posting on Twitter how he has so much riding on the U.S. election, and he feels we were observing that the people who are responsible for um, these global consequences. I mean, we have to recognize the fact that many people who are eligible to vote in the United States are simply not up on enough on the science of COVID to make good choices for their own communities, their own neighborhoods, their own grocery stores, let alone to make good choices for the rest of the world. Right, and I mean that has been really clearly demonstrated in the last 4 or 5 months. So it's a funny situation that we're in, where we are going to have to allow parties whose concerns are dramatically affected to have a say across national boundaries, and that's going to be really tough. That's going to be a very difficult situation for people to bear.
Well, and it's also, I think, like in a capitalist culture like ours, it's really easy to see why a big oil company would want the entire, nation, world, young people, whatever, to start trusting them after they, destroyed the planet. And that's, I would like to think that's an altruistic, like belief. Like they're like, oh, wow, we should really change. But I just think like changing the culture of a company that is many thousands of people, spending decades denying everything, pushing for expanded, um, rigs and everything, to like not cleaning up their oil spills, all of this stuff, like this decades and decades of abuse, um, you know, not treating their workers very well at all, when there are accidents and things like that. Just like to change the entire culture and be like, oh, no, but like now because we can make money over here, we're like equitable people. I just think I would like to see that culture change. I think that might, like as Greg said, it might be a little more difficult than them simply just putting out a statement, which is a factual statement, right? That their product is now dwindling, or the
So,
value of their product is dwindling. And I'm glad they're admitting it finally, at least.
well, so to me, it's a given that they're not going to like have some kind of change of heart. The focus is these people only function on greed. So you have to feed that to them,
Right.
and then we'll see the changes happen, and that's what's happening.
Completely. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It's just, I've really, I've been listening to a lot of really fascinating speeches by young climate activists talking about the the correlation between how we've treated the planet and our capitalist system, which I think is really interesting. And a lot of them, including Greta and others, have talked about the fact that the same type of greed that got us into this is not necessarily the same system that can get us out of it. And, a world that has, zero emissions still is going to be a world that produces a huge amount of energy. Hopefully it's green energy. But you still have to, wonder, like, who's going to be producing it? Are they going to be paid? Are they going to be safe? What about the waste products? So just because it's green energy doesn't mean the whole world is equitable, all of a sudden. So I'm just saying, if we start this new green sort of global economy, which is exactly what we need to do, no question about that, but it's still run by these incredibly greedy people who have a propensity to lie and treat people, badly, I just wonder how we're going to create not just a green society, but an equitable green society, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think we're talking about the same thing. I'm just focusing in different spots.
Yeah, I would say that there's probably a deeper connection between green and equitable than we might think. That it can't possibly, in actuality, be green until it's more equitable.
Well, exactly. And that's exactly what I'm saying. And so it's not just the way that we get energy, it's the way that we get energy that's going to be important, I think, here. But obviously this is a huge development. Glad to see BP saying that. I've had family that worked there in the wind section. And I'm glad to see that they're evolving, because we need to evolve very fast. Steve or Ian, do either of you have any thoughts on any of this? I'm curious to hear what you think.
Well, I'm actually just kind of listening in and taking it all in. It's a good discussion, though.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes, thank you. Yeah, maybe we can discuss a little bit more about this next week. I might have some more sources on this that might be fascinating. But I do think that this also connects to blockchain, because it's not just different types of money or, different ways to store data. It's also the way that we conduct ourselves when we store that data. So I really see it all as, there's so many different revolutions going on right now around the world. I think this is just another one.
Yeah, I mean, we have. Oh, go ahead, Ian. You haven't spoken yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, the hope for blockchain is that we'll be able to create some tools that can improve our governance, or at least get better sources of information to people, so they're not completely propagandized.
Right.
But right now, I think, self-help solutions aren't going to do a whole lot for the planet, because, on a global scale, we have a full generation of people that haven't been brought up to appreciate the connection between, the daily changes of the weather and the big picture of what's happening
Right.
to the planet. So at this point, either some technological miracles to re-engineer the climate, or to drastically improve our systems of governance, or to somehow wake everybody up to what's actually happening by giving them better sources of information that they can trust, I think are the tools we have to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and governance is going to be a big topic this year and in years going forward, because as we see all over the world, human beings are having trouble with governance, whether that's around energy or other sectors as well. So I think if blockchain can contribute that as a minimum, besides all the other things, I think that would be a worthy investment.
Well, if RChain can demonstrate our vote for the AGM, that's it's days in advance of the election, which is currently being called into question because of Trump's position on mail-in ballots during a pandemic.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, people need to be able to vote. I was just thinking this morning before the call started about like how to get perspective on things that happen on planet Earth or in our town or our country or, wherever we happen to be in the world. And I was thinking one really good way to get perspective is to say it about another country or another planet and see if it sounds weird to you. Like in America, for example, like we could say, oh, well, the post office is, having some trouble here. We could say, to put it very lightly, the post office is being slowed down, But then we could, if you say it about another country, if I say, oh yeah, Japan is really having trouble keeping their post office going, I would say, well, that's an emergency. But somehow when we say it about ourselves, it's, like if you say it about someone else, sometimes it seems like it's more, it's more of an emergency. Like if we said, oh yeah, there's this other planet and their ice shelf just collapsed, I would be like, oh my God, that's crazy. But since it's our planet with our ice shelf, it's like we just kind of go on. I don't know if anybody else feels that way.
Well, I think as a Canadian, we have kind of a different perspective on the United States, and I think it seems like the United States thinks it's more important than it is sometimes, and it seems like the U.S. thinks that it's kind of infallible with its, we don't really see America as the greatest democracy in the world. I don't, I think a lot of countries like Canada,
you don't? I'm so surprised.
So those kinds of, when America calls itself things like the greatest democracy in the world or the bastion of freedom, we don't really agree. So for America to kind of look at its postal service going down, it's like, well, we're still the greatest country in the world, so this is just a little blip. It's like, you guys don't see it. You're going down. Your democracy
I'm seeing it.
is going
Okay.
down. It's like,
I am seeing it.
Yeah, I know you are, but I'm just saying.
But no, you do definitely have a really good perspective of being in, a more civilized place.
It's actually kind of terrifying watching the decay of the American
Empire.
Yeah, the system, the checks and balances, and all the the other side of the coin is that America was hugely influential on how Canadian democracy was formed, and we pay massive homage to the origins of what America set up. There's still definitely a strong love in Canada for what America has contributed to the world, which is kind of part of what makes it so tragic for us when we observe what's happening right now. It's shocking how remarkably easy it has been for a authoritarian single person, really quite single person, to disable so many of the checks and balances that have been set up and it's kind of working.
Well, they have been trying to privatize the USPS for a long time. I will say that, because there's a lot of corporations that are sort of circling like vultures trying to make money in all these different packages. So that piece of it has been looked at for a long time as being sort of a goal of certain people.
I agree with you, and Daryl, I think you have to look a little more closely at what was going on with the gerrymandering. So the Republican Party has a longer than a decade effort to adjust the districts and representation.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is well documented at this point.
Politicians have been wanting to pick their voters for a long time. Well, they have been picking their voters for a long time.
But the Republican Party, it's not just politicians. The Republican Party's concerted effort tilted the landscape so dramatically. My belief is what we're seeing now, especially with the Republican senators and Trump, is they now believe that they can affect the coup. This is why why Bill Barr can break the law in public and not bat an eye. There's because they know, or they feel that they're at the cusp of the coup. In their minds, the coup has already happened. So it's not like Trump is really just the representative. I mean, he's not the mastermind of of this. This has been going on for a long time.
Well, of course, you couldn't do anything without Mitch McConnell. And Ian, I want to say I'm sorry I've allowed this to devolve into a purely political discussion. So we might have to take this out during editing. But go on. I'm sorry. I just wanted to apologize. I'm so sorry.
On the gerrymandering, I mean, it's both parties do that now. I mean, whether the Republicans did it more or are better at it or were the first ones, that's another question. But everybody does.
No, I agree with you that both parties, but the Republicans were just significantly better at it.
They seem to be a little more aggressive in general.
I've heard about like separate houses being like carved out in the gerrymandering process. Like it's precision, like strategic.
Yeah, it's
precision.
crazy. It's really crazy.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not political to say that Bill Barr broke the law.
I know that. Do you think that I don't agree with everything you're saying and I would go 10 degrees farther than you said it? I'm just trying to be appropriate on this friggin' podcast. Obviously, I agree with you 1,000%.
No, I'm not speaking to you, Nora. I'm speaking to other people who might complain. I mean, Bill Barr lied to Congress and the American people about the Mueller report. And that is a fact, right? And it's reported by Congress recognizes that, and there is a reckoning.
We're not in a place in the nation where we can have a discussion about facts. That went away in like 1992.
What's scaring the heck out of me right now is that the example of what's happening in U.S. governance and the example of politicians and lawmakers just outright breaking the rules, that example has just filtered down to everyday people. And I'm seeing more and more in public, people just flaunting the rules that we spent, hundreds of years and using a process of people getting together and deciding what the policies and rules are so that we can all live peacefully together. Now people feel like they have license, like, oh, I don't have to follow the rules anymore. And it's leading to conflict like crazy everywhere and breakdown of order in society.
Absolutely. And there's a really great question about what kind of ocracy we have. Some people say we have a democracy. Some people say we have a kakistocracy, which is government by the worst among us, for example. There's also the kleptocracy, which is government by theft, which is maybe what we have. There's oligarchy, which is government by the richest people. So there's a lot of different ocracies, and we're certainly not squarely in one of them, unfortunately.
But this is why, if we go back to blockchain and RChain, and specifically on-chain governance will provide some of the tools. So I agree with Ian's point way back when that's a part of what we're trying to do. But the other thing that I keep trying to point out is that even if you have the tools, it doesn't mean that people will use them or use them in a way that you imagined.
Well, yeah, we thought the internet was going to make everybody so smart and capable of understanding anything. And everybody's just, now we've got flat earth Facebook groups. So I don't know. So people have to be willing to use the tools in an intelligent way. Greg, I don't know if you're talking, but you're muted in case you are talking. I'm not sure.
Sorry, I'm muted.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah,
No
I was just
problem.
ordering a coffee. So
Oh, that's good. So anyway, we might have to edit a little bit of that out. But I'm going to leave that up to somebody else. I'm so sorry. I hope that I feel personally responsible for the way this. Anyway.
well, I don't know that we have to censor ourselves so much. I don't consider myself left-leaning or right-leaning so much as wanting to build workable solutions, because we know that the science is incontrovertible. We are faced with the consequences of climate change. This is real, and
Right.
and we can't count on the corporations to clean up their acts in time, and we can't count on the governments to clean up their acts in time. We're going to have to do this from the ground up, and so we're going to need mechanisms by which we can coordinate to do that. That's the bottom line. It's this really, really common sense, and and just because you have a functioning nervous system and a functioning brain, it doesn't necessarily mean that either of those things are put to good use. So that's where culture comes into play. Nurturing and care and connection, all of that comes into play to put those things to good use. And that's why I keep saying that there are other technologies beyond the bits and bytes. Those also have to be brought to bear on this problem.
Yeah, I agree. And I've been watching footage, thinking about, how to coordinate ourselves. I've been watching footage of the first wave of evictions, and I saw footage of a woman who said she had COVID, and she was an elderly woman, and she was being evicted from her house, and the police took her out of her house, and she had some of her things, and she was sitting on the street in a pile of her stuff, and they wouldn't even let her get her oxygen tank inside the house, which is just the most kind of one of the most obscene things you can think of. But in today's day and age, it's kind of what happens. And I was thinking about why it's so hard to coordinate around getting people the help they need. Like, there's so much wealth in the world right now. There's so much wealth being made and created and generated. And there's so many people who are struggling so deeply that can't go to the grocery store. Woman with COVID sitting on the street with no house anymore. I mean, it's just like crazy, And I just wonder why it's so hard for us to coordinate to get the help to the right people,
No, it isn't. Thanks, Bethany.
That is something that I think about a lot, especially now in this kind of new crisis era since March or so in the United States. But yes, we've been in a crisis era for a while.
I would like to just mention one last thing that might seem completely unrelated to what you guys are talking about. But as you guys are talking, one thing that happened to me this week is, my daughter, she's 11, she's obsessed with pop music. And so I listen to tons of pop music every day, which is really interesting for me because, I usually come from a different place musically. But I love a lot of pop music. But there's this one song that came out this week that, every once in a while a pop song comes out and it's like, oh my God, this is pure genius. So I would like, if you have a chance this week, to recommend that you take a listen to the song My Future by Billie Eilish.
Oh, she's great, no question.
It's this song is it's about self-regulation. It's about making a decision in your life. If you're going to overcome depression or drug addiction, ultimately it comes down to a decision that you have to make. And once you make that decision, you can't go back. I'll just leave it at that. It's an amazing song.
Well, I love Billie Eilish, so I very much enjoy that comment.
Well,
and
check out this song, because it's like, I love Billie Eilish too, but this song is like, she and him, Phineas, have outdone
her brother, yeah. Uh-huh.
It's just like it just keeps, that team just keeps getting better and better.
Yeah, they're amazing. They actually live very close to me. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for participating in this week's Climate Coordination Rcast. It went into a few different areas, but that's okay. If you'd like to be a guest, please email us at climate@rchain.coop and subscribe on YouTube. And you can become a member of RChain at rchain.coop. And thank you all so much for allowing this discussion to happen.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Ciao, ciao.